I'm here mostly to talk about the news, and what was the fastest way to get on the news, and that of course is a crisis. And so when people talk about crisis communications, what does that exactly mean? Well, crises come in all shapes and sizes. There's the political scandal where the politician is trying to not only keep himself elected, but also trying to stay out of jail. There's the sex scandal, where the politician is not only trying to keep himself elected, but is also trying to keep his wife from killing him. There's the crisis, the real crisis, the huge oil spill that seemingly never ends. There's the political crisis when someone tries to oust a sitting speaker. There's the terrorist crisis when the country is under attack. And there's a kind of crisis where your friend gets killed in the Capitol grounds by a deranged murderer. I've seen and dealt with all of those crises. And they're all different types of crises. So I prefer to think of this as how to communicate in a crisis rather than crisis communications. Because while each crisis is different, the way you effectively communicate in the crisis stays constant. The hardest but most important thing to do in a crisis is to try to keep your emotions in check. When you're in a crisis, everything moves faster. You can't answer the phones quick enough. Everybody wants all the answers right now. Everybody's worried about either their own personal safety or their jobs or their reputations. In a crisis, conspiracies pile up fast. In a crisis, cable news shows come running, bloggers start blogging, Facebook starts buzzing, Twitter starts tweeting, and pretty soon your mother calls up and says, "Hey, you all right?" And of course you aren't. You're tired, you're emotionally drained, and all you really want to do is curl up at home in bed with all the lights turned off and hope it all goes away. I know that personally because I remember after 9/11, that's exactly what I did. And after the Capitol Hill shooting, that's what I did. I just curled in my bed and said, I wish they would go away. And the phone calls never really stopped coming. They never stopped coming. The hardest part of a crisis is imagining when the crisis will be a thing of the past. But the most important part of understanding a crisis is understanding the situation surrounding it. Abraham Lincoln's admonition that this too shall pass is an essential part of understanding how to communicate in a crisis. And when the story ends, and it will end inevitably, your goal is that you and your reputation survive. That requires you to communicate with certain attributes that will be remembered once the crisis has passed. Honesty, empathy, accuracy, and at the appropriate moment, some humor. All the great communications gurus say that the best way to deal with a crisis is to plan for it. That's a nice piece of advice. But a crisis is a crisis precisely because you didn't plan for it. It's nice and important to have some elements of a plan in place should a crisis hit. But as Steinbeck would say, the best laid plans of mice and men do often go astray. It is nice to have clear lines of authority for who handles communications in a crisis, but the reality is that the lawyers and the communicators, I'm thinking mostly about corporate communications now, are inevitably going to be at each other's throats. The lawyers are going to want to shut down everything, and the communicators are going to want to open everything up. Ultimately, the boss is going to make the decision. And whoever wins the boss's confidence before the crisis is going to have the advantage during the crisis. Of course, having a skilled communicator who has solid relationships with the media is probably the best part of pre-planning that you can do. A smart press guru can kill a bad story or more likely redirect it, but he or she has to have the authority and the access to know all the facts. A good press person understands the essential elements of a good story and where you stand in it. Are you the lead actor? Are you a bit player? Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist? Who's driving the story? And how can you get control of the steering wheel? What is the situation? And by the situation, I'm not talking about the guy in Jersey Shore. Understanding the entire situation is essential to communicating in crisis. When you put out a spokesman who doesn't understand the entire situation, well, you end up with, I don't know if you remember President Bush's old spokesman, Scott McClellan, but that's what you end up with. Someone who looks kind of stupid and going to get in trouble. When a crisis hits, no matter what the crisis, you first have to do an inventory of all the facts. Find out what you know and what you don't know. What's the crisis? What's the storyline the media is following? Who's feeding the media? What's the truth? That's helpful. What is being reported, which is also, as you know, is not often the truth. During a crisis, you have to separate what you know from what you don't know. Comment on only those things you know for a fact, and only comment on the facts with other facts. For those things you don't know, say you don't know. Don't speculate and don't spin. Promise to find out and then try to find out. communicating in a crisis is kind of like playing golf in Florida on the beach and in the wind. If you put a little spin on the ball in the wind, the golf ball will spin out of control. Believe me, I do that all the time. It's just nice to go out. The same as spinning in a crisis. In a fever pitch, as you all know, reporters are looking for any angle. They'll take your spin and they'll use it against you in a way that you will never know, in a way that won't be very helpful to you. So my advice to anybody communicating in a crisis is simple. Stick to the facts until the crisis passes. Lanny Davis, who used to be a lawyer for President Clinton, had a column in a local newspaper, The Hill, when he talked about crisis communication strategy. His strategy was tell it all, tell it early, and tell it yourself.